Hello and welcome to the NixyPod podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Felbert, a quantum intuitive coach, teacher, and filmmaker sharing authentic spiritual stories. I deep dive into life's mysteries and magic by interviewing amazing people that have followed their calling. Each episode serves to spark something in your soul. I'm really excited to be interviewing Richard Higgins today and to share him with you. Richard has taught me to be a family constellations facilitator, and I wanted to share a quick story with you of how I got introduced to family constellations. And I did a one-on-one consultation with Richard, and it was the first time I really got to understand the dynamic between myself and my now ex, and understand what that dynamic looked like from an energetic point of view, and from actually really being able to see it and feeling the validation of what was really going on. And it allowed such a beautiful change in my understanding and being in that relationship at the time, and also gave me validation to where it was really at, and to be able to then work with that afterwards. And from there, I was pretty much hooked. When Richard moved to Cape Town, I started doing all his group family constellations, and eventually did the training with him. Richard, thank you so much. And I have two questions to start with. The one is, how did you get into family constellations? And you trained with the father of family constellations, Bert Hellinger. For those of us that are already interested in family constellations, what was he like?
Okay. Well, I'll do the short one first, if you don't mind, because the other one's a bit long-winded. Yes, Bert Hellinger. In family constellation, you don't really train with the person, right? The way it works is they have these 8-day intensives where you go and you observe them work. All right, so it's slightly different. You don't sit down and kind of learn the techniques. It's learned through observing their work and seeing how they do things, pretty much like you would observe me working and take from it. So, yes, I went over in 2007 because I knew if I was going to be committed to this work, I had to go to the source. I was trying to get as close to the source of a modality as possible. Read all of his books. He was up there for me in terms of icons. So some friends put some money together as the starting for me to pay quite a large sum. It's not cheap flying over there and paying for these courses, and it was not within my means. And they spurred me on because they just said, you got to do this, Rich. And that started, so I had to come up with the rest and found myself there. I was the only South African there amongst a group of 150, 200 people in Austria. And because he'd lived here with the Zulu for 17 years and hadn't been back since 1994, and he heard there was a South African there, he insisted that I come and have a chat with him. So they gave me an appointment time, and I went and I sat down with him like we are now. And his first thing was, move that chair and sit in front of me. So that gruffness for which he was well known, that very Germanic kind of expression, was immediately there. So I was a bit intimidated, to be honest. You know, when you put someone on a pedestal and you've learned so much from them, you know, you're a little bit like a schoolboy. It was like being in the headmaster's office, you know. And he was very interested in what was happening in South Africa and asked me questions about that. I obviously babbled away and probably spoke a lot of rubbish, and thought about it afterwards, and I could have said this and I should have asked that. But anyway, I sat in his energy field and I felt what it was like. So there was a beautiful experience. And then during those 8 days, he actually called on me to represent in 2 of his constellations. And that was quite a gift as well, because there were students there that had worked with him or watched him work for many years who'd never got a chance to constellate. And here I was, Kippy, coming from Africa, getting cast in 2 roles, or asked to represent in 2 roles. So to stand in that field, in the Bert Hellinger's field, and to feel the energy and to have him give you healing sentences and all that was another really interesting experience, you know, separate from observing and reading his stuff. So yeah, enriching, and I'm deeply grateful to have had a direct connection with him before he passed a few years ago.
Me too, because I think all your students get the benefit in some way of that as well.
I had so. How did I get to it? Well, I was born angry and tended towards being a bully and aggressive and violent from day one, really. And there's systemic reasons for that, which, of course, I uncovered during my training and subsequent journey with family constellations and healed it, which is why I decided to do the work. So I started off by looking at religions because I thought they'd have the answer. So I hopped from religion to religion. Then stuff started coming out, Norman Vincent Peale and Dale Carnegie and some of the early self-help books, Man's Search for Meaning. And I read all of that stuff. And then Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer and those sort of books started coming out. So I devoured all of those thinking something's going to have the answer. Went to psychologists, gurus, faith healers, sangomas, anyone who I felt would know where's this anger coming from. Nothing worked. It chipped away at the surface. It gave me little coping mechanisms, but the core pattern was resistant. And then a friend of mine suggested that this was a modality I should look into. 2 years before I actually did, because I thought it was just another fad. And when I eventually did, it spoke to me loud and clear. It was that, that moment of revelation when you go, so many clients come and say, what's your life purpose? What's my life purpose? Help me find I'd found my life purpose. It had found me. The first constellation I saw, I went, wow, this is it. This is what I'm here to do. Where do I sign up? So I had a TV production company and staff and equipment and clients and doing stuff for TV. So it took about a year. The initial training was a year. When I wound down the company, gave my equipment away and clients to colleagues, referred to colleagues, cleared out my studio, bought 20 plastic chairs after my training. Literally, in fact, I think it overlapped. I think there was a week or two of my training to go when I started shrinking in my first little groups, and never looked back. Changed my life, and in the last 2 decades has changed many, many other lives. Not me, the modality, the field. It's heart expanding.
It is. When you experience it, it really is. What is family constellations for those that don't really know what it is? It's quite difficult. I find it difficult to explain because it's so vast. But how would you explain it to someone?
Okay. In a larger nutshell, it's the understanding that we are not autonomous, that we are energetically linked to those who came before us in a very real, tangible way. And many, if not most, of the decisions we are making in our own lives are informed by what's happened before. Right? We are connected to our ancestors in a morphogenic field. Now, in the Western society, we've become very egocentric, very, very self-centered. It's the me generation. Narcissism is rampant, and it's all about me and how much can I get and how much can I do and achieve. And this is the antithesis of how life is structured. So Hellinger identified what he calls the orders of love, who belongs to this energetic family and also flesh and blood family. So your siblings living and dead, your mom and dad, your 2 sets of grandparents are energetically connected, whether you like it or not, whether you get on with them or not. So the image I like to use, which is the simplest, is 2 streams coming down. A stream of life force, energy, coming down from your paternal line and your maternal line. Some of it's carried in your DNA. Some of it's carried in what's called the morphic field or the morphogenic field, which is an energy field. It's intelligence, it's wisdom, all right, that flows down. Now, anything that hasn't been resolved upstream in granddad or great-granddad, the First World War, the Second World War, rapes, traumas, any PTSD causing kind of incident flows down. Right? And our ancestors didn't have the tools or the wherewithal to do the level of healing they were able to today. They were trying to survive the First World War and the Second World War and the pogroms and the genocides, and just to feed their kids and put food on the table and the roof over their heads. You didn't go and sit down and talk about your woes, That started coming along, fortunately, in my time. So there's a build-up of bestrudeln, as they say in Afrikaans, right? Flotsam and jetsam of pain upstream. and it lands on the next generation. The Bible talks about the sins of the fathers being visited upon the sons and daughters of man unto the third or fourth generation, which was their way of saying, look, this stuff comes downstream. When you work with the Xhosa Zulu, they understand this intrinsically. It's all tacky for them, All the red tribes, they understand this. And we lost this understanding in the Western model. So family constellations brings us back and says, hang on, you're not alone, all right? Those who came before you are relevant and alive energetically in your life to this day, and you can heal what happened upstream because it's manifesting in your own life. And the good news is, if you do that, you clean up the stream, and those who come after you for 7 generations, as the Hopi believe, will benefit from that. So it's a transgenerational healing modality which has a deep understanding of our interconnectedness at a level beyond our personality.
If I'm excited about this work and I want to come along and I want to see what it's about, can I constellate without really having something that I feel like I need to constellate? Can I just come and see what comes up?
Preferably not. Okay, my saying is, a constellation is not about curiosity. Right? If a person is just curious, yes, come along to a group and sit in as an observer, as a representative, possibly to see what it's about, to see if it really is for you. So there's an opening for that. But if you want to experience a constellation, it's important to have something to present with. A relationship issue, a health issue, a career issue, a personality disorder, or something tangible to work with, because it's not a plaything. It's a profound, deep, the therapeutic model, and we have to respect that. So the beauty of it is that you can cover a wide spectrum of conditions. So I might work with the biggest pattern I work with, sadly, is abuse in women, followed by abortions in women. With men, it's often career issues. They kind of hit this invisible ceiling and that. Medical conditions, people coming in with cancers and stuff like that. And more abstract things as well. There's pretty much nothing that one can't pop into the field and explore. So if your life's not working, there's something that's not working in your life, a relationship, an aspect of your personality, career, that's the motivation to come. I like it, to be honest, the exact opposite, where people come to me and they say, I've tried everything. I've done this and this and this and this, and I've had enough now. I want to change this pattern in my life. I go, good, now we're cooking.
Now you know exactly what you're wanting to change.
And you take that wave of intention from that person and you ride it and you take it home with them. It's not a fluffy, let's see what this is about, and give it a try.
Yeah. It's nice to observe if you're feeling excited about family constellations and you get so much out of it.
Welcome to that's why I started those groups for curious people, to come and see and go, okay, is this for me or not? Because it's not for everyone. It's something that I'm quite big on when I'm working with a client. Practically every client I work with in a group or one-on-one I say to them, it takes courage to do this work. Thank you for showing up. And I mean it. I'm in awe of people that show up and have the courage to do the work, because sometimes got to go to some dark places. And on the other side of that coin, why I like doing it so much was because for decades I looked for help, and no one could give me the answers. And so to have found something that literally found the source of my aggression, helped me move right through it, from road rage, head-butting, aggressive father and wife, partner, to hopefully pretty much the opposite, was so life-changing that I went, I need to do this for other people. If this shifted me, a lost case, I don't want to waste this opportunity. So I know what it feels like to sit in that chair and need someone's help, and knowing the power of this modality, blending those two, having finally found a tool that worked for me and I can pass it on in some small way, was just manna from heaven.
And what does that actually look like? If you come, I know you can do one-on-ones and you can come in a group. What does that look like?
Okay. The work started in the round, as they call it, right, with Hellinger. He drew from many different disciplines, and he took the best from all of these incredible modalities that were coming out in the 70s and blended them into this modality, which is accredited to him, but he didn't actually name it. All right, but he took it to the whole next level, and he discovered these, what he calls the orders of love, which is who belongs to that family system, who has the right to belong, and the impacts of them not being included in the appropriate way. So that's how the work started with him and his first generation of colleagues. And the basic idea was that a client would sit with a therapist and present the issue. And based on the data coming back, we try and stay away from stories. A lot of people have been to traditional therapists where you're encouraged to speak out. And so many people are not heard in their own lives that they don't need a second irritation. In this work, we try and stay away from too much story. Just get the core information. Who's in your family? Who's missing? Who should be there? What traumas have there been? And who might be energetically entangled with someone in that system? There's three main areas. So based on what your client feeds to you, you will invite them to set up from that circle of participants a representative for themselves and a representative for whoever they're working with. So if a woman and a mother comes to work with an issue around her mother, which is one of the bigger patterns, you would say, choose someone for yourself, choose someone for your mom. What happens then is really fascinating, and what makes this modality like really different. And I've seen maybe thousands of constellations now, and you never tire of the magic of it. That person, total stranger, doesn't know your story at all, seems to connect with the energy of the person they're representing. It's a kind of an energetic channeling effect, which therapists, especially in Germany, don't really like that term because it has kind of a new agey connotation. But that's essentially what it is. It's a temporary contact between soul to soul. And the information comes through from the soul or the subconscious level of that family system through that person that's not even known to the client sometimes. So based on what those representatives of the mom and the daughter share with you, the therapist is able to put that together with the pattern that's been presented and offer an intervention where those people speak to each other at that soul level, which is devoid of personality. So there's no personality getting in the way, wanting to score points in that. It's pure soul to soul. And when you see that in action, you see love at play. And love is allowed to re-emerge into that relationship. And you really see it happening in that collective field, which may become much bigger. You might bring in other people. There might be an aborted child that comes in, or a missing sibling, or a grandfather who died in the war who hasn't been on it. So they can become quite complex. And in fact, that's one of the dangers, that we sometimes make them a bit too big, and they get out of hand in early days. So it's essentially a sculptural 3D presentation of what's happening at the soul level of that family. It brings it to life so that you can resculpture it, reframe the blueprint, and in the days and weeks that follow, that new imprint permeates up into the everyday life of those people, and changes start to happen, sometimes unbelievably quickly, almost magically, which is why, it got such a good name. Everyone wants one of those magical ones. Others take weeks, months, maybe even years if they're deeply embedded patterns. So that's how it started.
Yeah, I've also often found that I could work with someone and some other modality comes in, it's allowed to come in to actually make the shift.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the role of the therapist is to be alert to that and open to that. And what I love about the modality is that the facilitator does relatively little. It doesn't look like it to people observing it, but you really, really do as a facilitator, because something bigger is at play. All right, we call it the morphogenic field, or the knowing field, or the ancestral field. It's this quantum field of information, of wisdom, of love, essentially, that is at play. And when it's given the opportunity, the portal to allow that healing into the family system, it grabs it with both hands. And the representatives, those who represent the individual family members temporarily, are the ones who channel that information in. So they like gold if you're a facilitator. And all your job is to do is to observe what the impulse is from that representative, or you might feel something's missing in the field, or someone's looking in a certain direction, so you get the sense that something's missing, or someone's been looked for. So you just watch these little clues and you try them out. The beauty is you can't really make mistakes. Right? The field kind of protects its turf.
As long as you know how to read the field, right? That's what the facilitator's trained in.
That's a little bit of a skill, to overcome the fear of thinking you need to control things and getting yourself out the way. Right at the beginning, when I first started, I was meditating. I go, okay, well, how do I start this? How do I get going? Because I'm a control freak, right? And the field said to me, just show up and we'll do the rest. So that's what I try and do. A control freak doesn't even shoot.
And also, when I've found that as a representative, someone who's been chosen to represent a mother or a sibling or even sometimes a country, I learn so much just by representing. Because I often find that people want to come to the groups because they have something to constellate. But I've found personally so much out of just coming and being part of the group and being able to represent, or even just watching, observing how things, and there's always a reflection. It's like it's synchronistic, so that there's no mistakes when you come together in a group.
Indeed. You touch on such an important aspect of the work there. So I always say it's happening at three levels primarily, right? One are the observers, the witnesses, those sitting in the outside circle. They're an important part of it because they create that womb in a way. And when they are watching and observing, they're providing a service to the person being constellated, because we're not seen and we're not heard enough. So to have a well-meaning group of people focusing on your journey and your pain, and to feel held or to feel seen, is such an important resource for the work. Those people in turn are watching the story, the client's story in front of them, but all our stories are the same stories. We know in the TV industry there's only 7 main scripts, right? So you're watching something there, and I've lost count of the number of times a woman has wanted to work with her own abortion, and there's been an earlier constellation with a woman's abortion, and that person sitting in their chair there has had such a cathartic experience that when it comes to their turn, they say, it's actually enough. I got it, and I've done my internal processing, and, let's leave it there. So they really benefit by observing. And then the next level up is the representatives. And to stand in someone's shoes, quite literally, is such a gift. And that's, in my view, how you really learn the work. Is I was the only male during most of my training. So I was the good dads, the bad dads, the boyfriends, the murderers, the rapists, the abusers, and occasionally the good guy. And more lately, the grandfather. And you really feel that. You feel where that person is coming from and what their own pain was, because, the harshest of characters that we deal with, when you stand in their shoes, you realize what pain was embedded in them, and they were just passing it forward. So empathy develops with every representation you do. And the other thing is, as you have probably discovered already, when you are chosen to represent, there's always a resonance with your own story to some degree.
Absolutely.
It might be your own direct experience, or it might sit within your family system somewhere. So it's purely by representing, your family system is getting the energetic benefit of that. And then, of course, if you're doing your own constellation, well, then you're right in the trenches, and that's where the action happens. But everyone is benefiting in a workshop, which is why it's so rich and so uplifting, actually.
Yeah. I often find people very uplifted when they leave. But also, just to bring in as well, if you are chosen to represent a rapist or someone that's been really mean or done really horrible things, not to say that that's directly related to you. It's just something.
Oh, no, that's all trouble.
But there seems to be some sort of lesson, even if it's that you've had or one of your family has had that experience, and then you get to stand in that person's shoes.
No, that's right.
That's also quite interesting.
Because, you might have had an aunt who was raped during, the Second World War or something. So your aunt would be the victim, but there would be a perpetrator involved. So the perpetrator and the victim energy are both sitting in that stream of life force. So you could be representing, that part of the energy that, the rapist is not actually you. And this is quite an important point, actually, because sometimes someone in a later generation is carrying energetically the experiences of an ancestor so fully that they can think it's their own experience. And you have to be very careful in this work to assume that that person was molested or raped or something like that, because they might be carrying it. It's so real and so present in their energy system. But it's not necessarily their own experience.
And then this work can help shift that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very much so. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, you work with a number of modalities. How do you bring other modalities into this work personally with your numerology and internal family systems?
Well, that's an excellent question, because again is something else I like about this modality. It dances the tango very well with lots of other modalities, right? I've explored just about everything that's out there, right? So one of the simpler things I use is the EFT tapping, which so many people are familiar with. It tends to be just if a client comes in who's very charged, before you go into this loving field, you want to bring down some of that charge, or just to teach them that as an ongoing self-help tool. So as simple as that is, it's hugely effective and really dovetails very nicely. As a numerologist, I use that as additional data because it really tells me how that person is programmed at an energetic level. And that gives me another whole stream of data to work with. And it's fascinating to see the parallels of the patterns in their numbers and to see how they present systemically. So it just enriches and informs the work. And sometimes in a session, I will blend the two so that the person gets the best. It's kind of a left brain, right brain balancing of the information, good practical insights as well as, let's move it energetically. So those are the two that I add in. And of course, the dozens of things I've studied, I'll whip out a book or quote a poem or, I love David Hawkins' work, the power versus force. I love teaching people the Karpman triangle, the basics of that. There's lots of relationship tools that I've learned over the years. So you find you pull in all sorts of stuff when you're working, particularly one-on-one. But broader than that, I've got colleagues that kinesiology dovetails beautifully with family constellations. All of the body work, actually, because family constellations works with the energetic patterns, and body work follows on nicely from there, where it can actually be released at a cellular level. So I often say to clients, please follow this up with some body talk or some TRE, trauma release exercises and stuff like that. Beautiful synergy.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And also, I've seen with you work quite shamanically and you bring in tools into your family constellation. Can you talk a little bit into that?
The showmanship side of it. Well, I was in television for 30 years, so I do kind of like a little bit of theatre, as long as it doesn't get in the way. So yes, some of my influences, I don't like to say I'm a shaman with shamanic training because I learned it mostly by my own and working with different indigenous teachers over the years. But the family constellations has a very strong connection to that ethos, because Helen Gowen lived with the Zulu for 17 years and drew quite strongly on their culture and their understanding of the connection to the ancestors and the connection to nature. That informed his work in the early years very much so. And we kind of lost our understanding of what the shamanic traditions have held in place for us for all these centuries. So I like to bring that in as much as possible. So the type of thing I do would be very basic stuff like smudging, which is very much part of the shamanic tradition. So we bring in pepper in and we smudge all the delicates before a group session. I smudge my space before working. I use drumming a lot because the drumming is very big in the shamanic tradition. And everything is frequency and vibration, so that's what we're working with. So at a certain point in the constellation, I might feel that there's anger there that just can't be released. They just can't touch it. And I will bring in the drum and up the beat to invoke that anger, to get that person to go down and grab that anger and let it come out, even if it's with a scream. And sometimes it is a big scream. And there's this beautiful cathartic release as they break through that barrier. And the drums are very useful for that. Shakers are very nice as well. Sometimes you just feel the energy just needs to be moved. It's kind of stuck.
It's a bit more gentle in the drum.
A bit more gentle, yeah. So I like these simple shamanic tools. And of course, working in circle and inviting in the ancestors. And before each workshop, I invite in the 4 directions and all the guides and ancestors. And I invite everyone in because there's people from all different cultures there. So you literally invite everyone you can think of to come in and support the process. Those are all, loose shamanic tools. And they enrich the work, and they're in resonance with the origins of this work as well.
Can you speak a little bit more into the field? We've introduced it, but it's also, I know most of the time you describe it as you have to do it to really understand it, especially with family constellations, but maybe moving from the origins of this work from Bert Hellinger's point of view, working with the Zulus and bringing in the nature and the ancestor aspect, and then what does that mean as this morphogenic field? What does it do? How does that allow us to then feel someone else's stuff, pain, love, all of that?
Well, perhaps we should first explain, in case some listeners and viewers aren't familiar with the term. We keep throwing in the morphogenic field. So it's an interesting story. The term comes from a British professor, Rupert Sheldrake, and he was studying dogs initially, and then went on to study herds and flocks, and then ultimately human beings. And what he discovered, I'll keep it short because it's a fascinating story in itself. He discovered that there's an energetic link that is species specific, right? So there'll be a field of energy like an internet. In the old days, we couldn't understand it. We called it Holy Spirit or the basket weave or the web of life, Now we understand with the internet that stuff can be linked energetically without wires and things necessarily. So there's like an internet, an energy link between everyone in that species. So there'll be a zebra morphogenic and a hedgehog morphogenic. So he discovered this, and Lynn McTaggart and others took this concept further and researched it and validated it. So it's become the generic, we call it the field, and it's a shortened version of the morphic or the morphogenic field, which is sometimes called the knowing field or the ancestral field, and it's all the same thing. Even scientists would call it the 0-point field or the quantum field. And we're talking about the same thing. Christians might call it the Holy Spirit. It really is the same thing. Right? And that field of energy connects us, whether we like it or not, whether we're aware of it or not. And only 10% of our choices, conservatively, are consciously made. 90% are subconsciously made. So a lot of the decisions we make are driven by what's happening in this subconscious field. And identifying the nature of those patterns, which is what Hellinger did, and how we affect each other at the subconscious level, but below our knowingness, unintentionally, always for love. That's what's so interesting. Always is the ethos of this work. That's the field, this mysterious, wonderful, fascinating thing which you never fully understand, but are constantly blown away by when you open it up and see the wisdom contained in it.
Yeah, when you first taught me that it's always for love, it was quite difficult to really get that, even though I'd done years of the work with you. But as I started to understand it as a facilitator and really look at it, the more you do it, the more you see that it really is for love. And it's hard for people to take that on. Yeah.
Yeah, if someone's molested you, violated you in some way, and you go, well, where's the love in that? Well, come watch, and as you cascade down, you'll see that abuser was perhaps abused himself, all right, by let's say his father. And then at a deep subconscious level, his subconscious might be saying, if we were to give it words, Dad, if I become an abuser like you, then will you see me, then will you love me, then will you stop abusing me? So at that deep 90% subconscious level, it's actually done for love of the father. Right. Doesn't look like it at the 10% personality level, quite the opposite. And yes, I can understand why people find it hard to believe, but once you see it in action over and over again, and this we are all one and there's only love sounded very new agey and alternative and flaky to me in the beginning,
Yeah. But it's the reality of it.
The reality.
Yeah.
So spirituality, psychotherapy, and quantum physics are now actually merging in a beautiful dance, synergistic dance.
Yeah, in this modality, absolutely. If someone wants to do a family constellations, they want to go to a group, let's say, what are they looking for in a practitioner?
Yeah, that's a good question. Me. No, just good.
I second that.
I think someone that you resonate with, first of all. Okay, this is what I'm very careful about referring people, whether it's a psychologist or a body worker, all that, because it's such a personal choice. It's like your gynae, right? You want to be careful. You want to feel comfortable with them. So first of all, do you feel comfortable with that person? Do you feel safe with them? Because you're going to go to possibly do some dark and dangerous places. You want to know this is someone you can trust. So that would be, for me, the first thing. I think the level of experience as well it would also be important, depending on where you're at and the size of the challenge you're working with would be important. I've noticed over the years that my capacity to do much more traumatic and deeper patterns has increased. If I look back to my early months, sometimes I wince. I think, oh my God, is that what I did? And because you only have so much experience, and you can't go beyond the boundaries of that. So gauge the level of experience of that facilitator and see whether it's in resonance with where you're at. Those would be the two main things: the experience and the ethics, and also that the container is safe. Right from day one, we've always been adamant. Whatever happens, particularly in that group, stays in that group. It does not leave there. That's a sacred place. I always think maybe it was because I was brought up a Catholic, and you had the confessional, and you stayed there, and it didn't come out of there. It's that kind of thing. So I see it as a sacred womb. So we always say to people right up front, every workshop, what happens here stays here. It needs to be protected. So you need to know that you're safe, that you're comfortable with the facilitator, that he or she is operating with ethics, and that they have a level of experience commensurate with the work you need to do.
One of the reasons that I wanted to do the training as a facilitator was I did a family constellation for someone else's film and for my own. And I was like, wow, if it can even go to something like this. And it really showed, it opened up new ways of where to go with both films. And where it might have been stuck, it's like, oh yes, that makes so much sense. And I haven't used it for film up till now, other than my own. But it also made me realize that it has such a broad spectrum of how to work with it. And I know that you don't like to take it too wide, because some of the bigger issues happening in the world can break down the field because it's so big, and we're just mere mortals representing. One of the things that have come up in some other research I've done that's coming up in an astrological way, because as you know I'm interested in astrology, is fear of change. And I think that's a big thing coming up for people at the moment. There's so much change happening in the world and in individuals. And how do you move towards that when there's like a building of fear amongst so many people? How could you work with that from a family constellations point of view? Would you even work with that from a family constellation view?
That's a really interesting question and a relevant one at this time, because there is a lot of chaos out there and people are picking it up, especially sensitive people. So it's called family constellation because you're essentially working with the family, right? And to be honest, all of us, and I include myself, have unresolved pains within ourselves and within our family system. It's very seldom. Perhaps I get a sample of people that are wounded, right? But there's very few people in my experience that don't have some level of wounding in themselves or in the family system. And there's enough work to do there, to be quite honest, to keep us going, keep us in business. There's so much there. So that's where I like to try and keep the focus. I love working one-on-one or in small groups with families, mom and dad and missing siblings and uncles and aunts. And it's so rich and it's so meaningful to those people. It's immediately obvious. Oh, that's what happened to my dad. That's why he was the way he is. I can start opening my heart to him now because I can see he did the best he could, and there just wasn't much in the tank, from his own dad or whatever. And that enriches their life, which then ripples out to their own family and, most importantly, to the generations to come. So that's why I've taken my focus there. But to your question, in the early days, when we see the magic of the field and we think, oh, wow, there's these big patterns that we can change. So we set up South Africa and all the different tribes in South Africa, going way back to the San and the early Bushmen, bringing it forward with representatives for each culture that arrived. And it got so big. And we did the same with the witches, the burning of the 500,000 to 3 million, the different estimates, witches that were burnt. Well, in those 500 years, the 3 million witches also got big and out of hand. So I learned quite early on that, to use one of Hellinger's healing sentences, for this I am too small. Right? So we have to know that stay in our lane, create a little ripple effect in the little area where we can make a difference. And if we all just doing that, those ripples will start to overlap eventually, and they will affect the bigger field. But we can't take on things that are too big. I think a lot of the early work with Hellinger coming out of the Second World War, a lot of that was realized, that there was nothing you could do about it. It was this big tide, the swell that overtook humanity. And ordinary, I remember going to Dachau and standing there by the ovens and thinking, on any other given day, the men who put those bodies into the ovens here were bakers and mechanics, and fathers and brothers and ordinary people. What took over? And it's this tide that's too big for us. So we have to get to a point where we can acknowledge what's too big for us, and bow to it as part of our fate. And I've also noticed, just as an addendum to that, some clients that come that want to save the whales or save the planet, or change the community in that, quite often, with no disrespect to them, because they have a positive effect through that, but sometimes they're avoiding their own journey, and they're externalizing it. So the rescue archetype's quite strong. And if I can help all those poor people or save those whales, or and when you work with them, you find that it's an attempt, to deal with their own healing in a different way. And yes, it does have a positive benefit, but it doesn't always heal their own wounding.
Thank you, Richard. That's very pertinent. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about or say?
Let me think for a second. In terms of the training for this work, okay, because obviously that's after my training, John Payne, that I trained with, left the country, and then I trained with the Chinese group and the German she brought out here. So I actually trained with both schools, as well as 3 separate trips to Germany and Austria, and of course the reading in between. But the greatest teacher is the actual field. You learn so much so quickly there. So I'm very keen for people to have that experience. So because John had left and no one was doing in Joburg and people wanted to learn the word, I kind of just dived in, and started a 26-week, I think it was, training. And I was literally reading up on it, refreshing my memory, and looking at my own training notes and writing a modality the afternoon before the students would come. I was kind of forced into it. Obviously, the field would work again, but that evolved, and then I changed it into a 5-day training. So the point I wanted to put across was that you don't necessarily have to do the training in order to become a facilitator, right? Because it's so useful in our everyday lives as well to have the understanding of how the systemic flow works and what the organization within a family works and what these patterns are like. You can take that out into your everyday life. You can start using those truth statements or those healing sentences in your everyday life, in your prayers, in your meditations. If you're another type of therapist, like my wife's an astrologer and tarot reader, she'll come up with a pattern during the reading that she'll quickly pull out some stones and do a little constellation. They just do a little pattern, So you don't have to come and learn it to, like you wanted to take it out into big groups and all that sort of stuff. It's very eclectic in how the information can be used. But in tandem with that, when you do the training, if we're talking about that specifically, you have to do your own work there, right? You do your own constellations, because you cannot facilitate the healing journey of others unless you've reached a certain level of your own healing. Otherwise, you're going to be projecting your own pain body into the scenario.
I think that's true of any modality.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's a blind spot which we have to keep an eye on, because we're all works in progress, and we have to realize that we're never fully finished, right? So when you're facilitating, whether one-on-one or a group, I always keep that witness or observer part, thinking, okay, Richard, where are the triggers for you? Where are your blind spots? And it takes a bit of effort to make sure that you don't get fully immersed in that, and you stay the process for the client, and you stay observant of your role in that. So that's what I like about it. Someone can come along as a kinesiologist, and take this wisdom and use it in their environment. It's very eclectic.
And it's also, like we spoke about earlier, being able to read the field. So the more sensitive you become, you then actually just allowing the field to inform you with your work. And that's, I guess that would be how you don't need to do the actual training, is because it's you just observing, if you have the sensitivity, the field, and then also to then speak into how then do you become sensitive to the field and what that is. So I don't know if you have an answer. I have an answer.
It's actually one of the first questions I asked when we were in training, and I saw the facilitator obviously tapping into something that wasn't evident to us lesser mortals, and I asked, how does one connect with that? Is it this field specific to you? And how do I get that skill? The answer, unfortunately, wasn't forthcoming. And what I've subsequently discovered is that I think it does take on an aspect of the facilitator's personality, right? Because I've watched many facilitators work, and they have different flavors, and it is literally just something that arrives the more you stand in that field, and the more you get out of the way, and the more you trust. It just gradually arrives, and you sit back one day and you go, wow, I did really little there today, and I was out of the way. And by contrast, you will actually notice when you go in and Richard appears in a constellation, and you'll feel the energy subside, and those things don't even also drops in, right? It dropped in from the field. And what is this dropping in from the field? The students will say, where the hell is it coming from? And there's no other way to explain it. You get there. Op 'n dag, as they say in Afrikaans, you will be doing a constellation, and you'll hear something, or you'll sense something, or you'll smell something, or you hear something, or you'll feel something, and you'll just go, I think we need to bring in someone there, and boom, 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 boom. And you can't really quantify where it's coming from. It's coming from that collective consciousness. And you realize, wow, I've got very little to do with this.
Absolutely.
What is your answer to that?
Well, other things have come up since you've been speaking, because what I've realized is that I've learned how to read the field mostly. I've had many teachers, but mostly from observing you, observing how you work. And that then informs me. I'm seeing how you're doing it. So that for me, that's how I've gone, okay, because I'm also very sensitive. Since I was very young, I used to see kind of beyond the veil. I used to see very weird things and animals and virtually. So it was there already in some way, but then learning how to read it was through observation. But I think you can also increase the sensitivity to it. My main suggestion would be meditation, because that's a practice that then starts to open you up and helps you get out the way.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'll second that. I didn't think of it because I'm a terrible meditator. I've tried them all over the years, and I'm really... So the way I do it now is I make life a meditation. If I'm washing the dishes, if I'm brushing my teeth, if I'm getting dressed, if I'm walking the dogs, I try and be as fully present in the moment as possible, because sitting down doing my mudras and some complicated meditation, or just even trying to quiet my mind, 50 years on, is a lost cause. But I like your idea that would open a person's field. And also interesting to hear about the observation. And that's an interesting point, because it doesn't matter who you're watching facilitate. And to be honest, during my training, there were certain things I saw that made me wince. And those were wonderful learning opportunities, because they alerted me to the possible mistakes that we could make as facilitators. Oof, I don't want to do that when I'm facilitating one day, That's all a learning opportunity. Some things you get right, some things you get wrong. And
in inverted commas, for those that are listening. Yeah.
Oh, yes, inverted commas, because there's no right or wrong, right? And in fact, when you get something in inverted commas wrong, usually that's the one you don't forget, because you don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
So I always say there aren't any mistakes in the field. But the thing about observing is really important. That's why to all my students, and even to clients, I say, go and watch people work. Watch as many people as you can work. They all have different ways of doing it. And that's why that's one of the reasons I have my bi-monthly groups, is to open that window so people can come and observe and see. And then it's not an official training thing, but I do try and explain occasionally what I'm doing, so that people can learn from it as quickly as possible and take that into their own lives and their own facilitations. You see, family constellation is about inclusiveness, right?
Yeah.
Very much so. Everyone has a right to belong to that system, must belong. So if that's the ethos of the work, we have to take that out, right? So little cliquey, this little group and that little group is just not part of my world, my reality, right?
Yeah.
If we claim to be family constellation facilitators inclusive, we've got to live it. To the degree where if we're in a circle and someone needs to go to the loo or something like that, unless it's in the training where it's not as important because it's a long time in there, I'll wait for that person to come back, right? Because it's such an important pattern. Let's make sure everyone's included first before we carry on.
And inclusiveness is a big thing for us in our country, in South Africa. So it really shows you how important it is, inclusiveness of not just the inner family, but the outer family, and then taking it in circles that ripple further outward. It's actually everyone and everything, even.
The winged ones, the four-legged ones, the standing ones, the finned ones, they're all part of the same family, different shapes and sizes. And perhaps, I don't know if you want to, we can talk a little bit about the one-on-one context, because we spoke mainly about the groups.
Yeah.
Chat a little bit about how it started one-on-one.
Yes, yeah.
So after being done in groups for, those first 3 decades or so, there was a need for people to be able to do this work in a one-on-one, because they couldn't make groups, or they didn't feel comfortable in groups with their traumas. So in my experience, the first person to really lay that out was Ursula Franke in Germany, who wrote 2 books about doing that one-on-one called In the Mind's Eye, and since then that's really, really grown. and there's a bigger market for that. And then people going online, and particularly during COVID, people became very familiar with working on Zoom. So now I found a huge growth in the one-on-one contact. So there's about 5 different ways that I can work with, or that I show in the training. The most common one is in the mind's eye, where the person closes their eyes, and you do exactly the same thing, except instead of using representatives, the person is seeing that person in their minds.
They're visualizing.
Visualizing is correct. And having that same dialogue, they speak it out loud to their mom or their dad, whoever. The healing sentences are usually pretty much the same. The effect is pretty much the same. The only thing you lose is that additional information you get from the representatives, all right, which can enrich it. And in certain patterns, like if there's family secrets, if there's stuff that's been tucked away that's resistant to come into the light of healing, the group can often reveal that. So that's the one place where I would casually say, okay, let's rather do this in a group, right? The second way is to externalize it, to cash in on that sculpturing aspect of constellations, where you write on a piece of paper, mom, dad, me, Buddhi, and you observe the sculpturing, who's looking at who's excluded, who's facing away from the family, and you get a story there from those A4 pieces of paper. Don't stay A4 pieces of paper, they come to life somehow. That gives you opportunity for the client to stand in other people's shoes again, and you as a facilitator can also stand in as the mom, and you're looking at your mom. What happens for you here? Stand in mom's shoes. How does it feel to stand in mom's shoes? Some people, you would be very receptive to that, right? So some people don't feel anything. Then you just stay with the normal dialogue. Some people really, can feel it and go, wow, I didn't realize this is how my mom felt, and that enriches it. So then you can also use placemats instead of the pieces of paper, different colored placemats that you can place out there. You can use little dolls on a tabletop where they can set up, and that gives it a little bit more of a 3D sculpture, and you can see which way people are facing, and you can have people lying down. Some people will respond to that quite well. Men don't seem to like playing with dolls. And then the last one is the stones that I work with, because they have a kind of organic, shamanic field to them, where you ask someone to choose a stone for themselves and a stone from them, and then you open the dialogue, and that, it's not like playing glassy or throwing the bones or something like that. What's actually happening is quite interesting, because everything is in wave form initially.
The information
in that information field is in wave form. So we know now from quantum physics that when you set your intention, vision board, meditation, prayers, ritual, journaling, all of that is creating a quantum collapse, all right, from the waveform to the particle.
Yeah.
That's why journaling is so powerful, So when you bring that stone in, it's collapsing your energy field into that focal point of that stone, and then your dad, right? And then you open a dialogue. I personally represent those people as well, because I'm able to split my energy, but that's not a technique that everyone can necessarily do. It only came along about 4 years ago for me. So I do show it, I do demonstrate it, and I do teach it, and if people have that capacity, then they can do it. But you have to be very careful that you're able to split your energy 100%, and that you're not contaminating or filtering in your own stuff at all.
It's really getting out the way again.
Yeah, because the traditional therapeutic approach is, the client's there, and it's a client-led process, the Carl Rogers, how do you feel? How do you feel? What does that make you think of?
This, again, collapses all of that into a much more concentrated space and time.
Yep.
So instead of 4 years of talk therapy, you can actually get down in one session even.
Yeah, I went to talk therapy for many years around my aggression, and it didn't help. It didn't change things. That's where the consciousness was at that time. Those are the only tools we had at that time.
Yeah.
And they were a really important stepping stone.
Yeah.
And the first generation of family constellation facilitators came out of the psychotherapy and the psychiatry and the psychotherapeutic schools, the Gestalt school, essentially. So there was the first generation. but then it broadened out, and credit to Hellinger, because he didn't contain it and make people have to get certain levels of training and pay a fortune to get accreditation and then take a stake from it like some modalities do. He just said, I was led to this, I developed it, it's my gift to the world. If you're drawn to it and you want to take it to the next level, do that. So that started bringing in those with shamanic training or influence and other therapists, and opened it and made it much more available, which is why I liked it, because I could go there as well. Of course, there is a little bit of a danger with that, because you might get people drawn to it for the wrong reasons, who perhaps don't have enough background in basic therapy modalities and techniques and family structure and the different insights you need to step into that realm. It's not a flaky new agey, let's play with this. So we were doing crystals last week, let's do family constellations.
And one of the big parts of family constellations are the healing sentences. And you would have need to have done quite a bit of family constellations to be able to facilitate the healing sentences that really make that change in the field and in the people.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea, and it's also one of the areas, particularly with the students when I'm training, where fear sets in, because how am I going to remember these healing sentences, and are they just going to drop in? Right? So it's twofold. One, there are certain healing sentences which Hellinger and the first generation developed, which you can't improve on. They really hit the sweet spot, right? So you tend to eventually start learning those, like learning a new language. You would get that little arsenal of healing sentences, right? But it's a much more creative, intuitive process, the healing sentences. So in the beginning, I used to read quite a lot of poetry, particularly Rumi, and that sort of thing, to get into that frequency, that love frequency. And so when I'm in the field, I'm feeling it energetically. I know the therapeutic sentences here, and some sort of blending happens where you give that healing sentence that's in resonance with that client. So there are certain ones that are used over and over again, but they never feel that you're saying them by rote. It's always like you're saying it for the first time with that person, So someone might be looking at his mom and say, "Thank you for the gift of life. You're the perfect mother for me. Thank you for everything you gave me. I'm deeply grateful, and I carry you in my heart." And you should
that deserves a pause. Yeah, you can really feel that, even if you've had a hard time with your mum. Those are truths.
And that's what the kind of healing centers you would get to at the end of a process.
Yeah.
It wouldn't start off there.
Yes.
It might be the gnashing of teeth and I hate you, and and then you layer it down and you get to this point where the client willingly grabs those sentences and the heart is open then.
Yes, because in the beginning of a constellation, that the person representing may not be able to even say that.
No, invariably not. That's why they've come to see you.
Yeah.
Because their mom is an absolute witch and doesn't understand them and never has and never been there for them and all of that. Half an hour, 40 minutes later, totally different picture.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much, Richard. I think that was, me too. It was such a beautiful explanation and understanding of what family constellations is and how it can help people and what a gift it is to the world.
Indeed, and we bow to Hellinger for that.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please write a review and rate the NixyPod show. It helps to get this information out to more of our soul tribe. Thank you for listening.